Black History Month. Why is it important? What's the importance of it? I was actually asked at the beginning of the month by someone I was working with. And I thought for a few seconds and remember a quote that states, cotton generated 50 to 60% of the gross national product of the United States at that time, which was 60 to 70% of the cotton produced in the world at that time. Well, why is that so important? Well, when you look at, the question was asked, well, didn't every country have slaves? Yes, they actually did. The term was indentured servants, okay? And they were all over the world. South America, North America, Caribbean, Europe, Asia. What was the difference? The difference in America in the 60s or 70s, approximately, there were two indentured servants. One white, the other black. Both ran away from their owners, the masters. The American court system added additional years onto the servitude of the white indentured servant. The black indentured servant became property. That's the difference that occurred here in this country. From that time on, black slaves were treated like property. If they had children, their children were property of the slave owners and were often separated from their families. They were sold at auctions where they were displayed like pieces of meat. Why is this important? Well, you've created a free labor market where all you have to do is feed them and house them just like you would cattle. Well, let's take a step back. In business, if you're able to reduce your cost of production, you have a greater profit. What is the highest cost of producing cotton? It's picking it. So, if that cost is free, then you've got minimal production costs. So slavery was a monetary making endeavor for the southern cotton farmers, which produced large amounts of wealth for a young, growing nation. So it was huge back then. So the southern plantation owners were then able to send their children to the best educational institutions in the country. Lots of them went to Ivy League colleges and got that education and brought it back to their families. And of course elevated their families. They lived in the fancy mansions, owned lots of slaves, and lived much like the nobles did in Europe. Remember, the nobles owned the land, and the serfs worked the land. So it was a very similar situation. And of course, they received most of the benefits from the land ownership. Well, when you hear people of color talk about reparations, what they're asking for is the redistribution of the wealth that was taken away from them, from the black slaves whose rights were wrongly taken away from them because of their skin color, and who helped in generating the wealth of the nation. Let's talk just a little bit about the rights and the oppression of a race of people that is still based on their skin color. The last recorded official lynching, took place in 1962, not that long ago. Reported, official. However, there have been a few unofficial lynchings that have occurred in the early 2000s in remote rural communities in Alabama and Georgia and some states down south. President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964 to prohibit racial discrimination in employment, education, housing, etc. Remember the statement, if all men are created equal. why do we need this law, which is still not enforced due to institutional racism today. The percentage of people in the criminal justice system as compared to the population. I'm using some old numbers from 2010. When you look at, you've got the white non-Hispanic is 64% of the population, and these numbers are 450 per 100,000 people. So of that 64%, 450 per 100,000. Hispanic are 16% of the population, and they account for 831 per 100,000 people. Blacks are 13% of the population, but they represent 2,306 per 100,000 folks. So you can see that there's a little disparity. So one of the things in looking that up, I said, well, I noticed that they had a number for England and Wales crime statistics, and the population age 10 and over. This is back 2009. 88% were white and 2.7 were black. So quite a difference. Stop and searches under Police and Criminal Evidence Act, 67.2% white, 14.6% black. Arrests in 2009 and 2010, 79.6% were white, 8% were black. The prison population, including foreign nationals, 72% were white and 13.7% were black. Now, this conversation is not about doom and gloom, because I've traveled to Scandinavia, parts of Africa, Kenya, South Africa, been to South America, Guyana, Brazil, Belize, Barbados, Jamaica, St. Martin, and Anguilla. And given all of that, we in this country still have the best and most opportunity of any people of black African descent on the planet. So that's something to revel in. And what I just wanted to say a little bit about now is, why was Black History Month created and why February? Black History Month also is known as African American History Month in the U.S., even as an annual observance. It also has an annual observance in Canada, Ireland, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and of course the United States. It began as a way of remembering important people and events in the history of African diaspora. The celebration began as Negro History Week, which was created in 1926 by Carter G. Woodson, a noted African-American historian, scholar, educator, and publisher. It became a month-long celebration in 1976, not that long ago. The month of February was chosen to coincide with the births of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. Black History Month is not limited to the distant past, but is constantly evoking and happening all around us with lots of first and trailblazing events in our community. Beyond recent photo collages, you can see that the celebration of Black history is both past and present. I want to tell you a little quick story. My daughter, at 10 years old, was living in Shelton, Connecticut. Not sure if you're familiar with that. A little small town up in Connecticut. And I was taking care of her. Her mother was away during the February break, the 1 week break that they had. And she was very troubled, and she came to me and she said, my school is not putting on anything for Black history. I asked my teacher and she's not doing anything for it. Well, she was the only African American student in the entire school.
Wow.
So what she did was, on that break, I took her in to work with me, and she worked on putting together some Black history moments for her classmates. and she came up with 5 or 6, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, the major ones, and presented that to her. So, she asked her teacher. She says, "Well, here's these reports. What would you like me to do with them?" The teacher said, "Well, you should read them." So she enrolled a couple of her fellow students. She did some, and they read the rest, and that was her Black History Month event that she managed, and and so
incredible.
Yeah. So when I think about that, as a 10-year-old, she had the wherewithal to know that something was amiss, to take the ownership and do it. And so for me, that's what Black history is about. It's an opportunity for us to look at our history, to acknowledge who we are, to acknowledge what we've done, to embrace it, to understand that there are still a ways to go. The fight's not over, but we can still revel in what we've been able to do and continue to do. So with that, I'm gonna invite you to just a couple of names. Let me full disclosure. So this year, my daughter on Facebook put little known facts of Black history every day. So I stole a couple of her items to include. Okay, so I can't take the credit for the research, but I'm keeping it in the family. Robert Smalls. Anybody know who that was? Who that might be? Robert Smalls was an African American born into slavery in Beaufort, South Carolina, during and after the Civil War. He became a ship's pilot, sea captain, and a politician. Dr. Patricia Bath. Anybody know who she was? She was born November 4th, 1942 in Harlem, New York City, and went on to become one of the leading eye surgeons in the U.S. She would develop in the 1980s a patent technology used globally to restore vision to people who, in some cases, have been blind for decades. John Mercer Langston, 1829 to 1897, Black leader, educator, diplomat. John Mercer Langston is known as the first American lawyer in Ohio and the first Black person to be elected to public office in the United States. He became the first dean of law school at Howard University and helped create the department. He was the first president of what is now Virginia State University, a historical Black college. Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler. Anybody? Was the first African American woman physician in the United States. Born in 1831, she first worked as a nurse in Massachusetts between 1852 and 1860. She was accepted to New England Female Medical Center and earned her doctor's in 1864, according to the time. She practiced medicine in Boston and Richmond, Virginia, primarily working with the poor who had limited access to medical care. In 1883, Dr. Crumpler published a renowned book of medical discourses in 2 parts, which many believe is the first medical text written by an African American author. Guys, you know this one. Elijah McCoy.
Hey, the real McCoy.
The real McCoy, that's right. So he's often regarded as one of the most famous Black inventors and was credited for 50 inventions over the span of his career. In an effort to improve efficiency and eliminate the frequent stopping necessary for lubrication of trains, he devised a method of automating the task. In 1872, he developed a lubricating cup that could automatically drip oil when and where needed, vital in avoiding sticking to the track. I'm just going to say a few more names, and I'm going to leave it to you to look it up and find out who it is. Marie Van Britton Brown. Actually, this one, I got to tell you. So what she did is she actually invented the first home security system. And she was actually a nurse, and she recognized that there were threats to her home and devised a system that would alert her of strangers at the door and contact relevant authorities as quickly as possible. So she actually had it so that she could directly go to the police department. Thomas L. Jennings. Some of you may know who that is. He was the first one to invent the patent. He was the first black man to receive a U.S. patent, and the patent was for his invention of cleaning process called dry scorching, which was the precursor to dry cleaning. Yeah. These two you actually know.
Glenn, you should also mention his daughter as well, because she was the first person to refuse to get off the streetcar, and when she refused to get off the white streetcar, they threw her off, and because of who her father was, they were able to hire an attorney, and then the person who represented her also became one of the presidents of the United States, because he had just, at that point, just graduated from law school. So it was the whole family. And then her mother was also a well-known speaker, and the only one who captured what she said was Langston Hughes. So the only auditory that was captured in actual writing about the family was Langston Hughes for the mother.
And there's a street in Lower Manhattan in the City Hall area named after that family.
And the African American Museum in Hempstead had a whole exhibit about it.
What's the name of that was Thomas L. Jennings. Okay. A lot of good information about that. Okay. Bessie Coleman was the first American female aviator, first black woman to earn a pilot's license. Because flying schools in the United States denied her entry, she taught herself French and moved to France, earning her license from a France well-known school of aviation in just 7 months. Her dream was to start a flight school when she returned to the United States to inspire other young women to become pilots. Mr. Wally Amos. I know you know that's right, cookies. But what he was actually more famous for was he was an agent for the stars. So he was a talent agent. So he was the first black talent agent with William Morris Agency of New York in 1962, where he represented major music legends like Diana Ross and the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, Sam Cooke, Simon and Garfunkel. To attract clients, he sent them homemade cookies using his famous family recipe. So the cookies were really kind of the hook to get them in, and then of course after that, he used the cookies. So, last but not least, Maddie McDaniel. You guys know who that is, right? Yes, actress and the first black woman to win an Academy Award for her role in Gone with the Wind. But this I didn't know. She's also a renowned songstress, cited as being the first black woman to sing on the radio in the United States. In addition to acting in many films, McDaniel recorded 16 blues sides between 1926 and 1929. 10 were issued. She was a radio performer and television star, of course, as we know. She appeared in over 300 films, although she only received screen credits for 80 or so. So, speaking of films, if you haven't seen this film, this goes back to 1995. It's called The White Man's Burden. It's
Yes.
you know
like
about
the
the
reverse.
yes,
So
it is.
shows like okay.
So
yes.
so
Yes.
it's a great movie to think about and look at because it created an alternative America where blacks were in charge and whites were the underclass. And it was starring Harry Belafonte and John Travolta.
Yes.
Okay, so there are some interesting aspects of it, and you begin to see the impact of media.